Thanks, everyone. All right, so this last session will last as long as you want it, up to 7:30. But we're going to flip it inside out now, because now I'm going to ask the questions, and you all are going to provide the answers, because after, in Anna's words, 36 hours of this, essentially, I don't know who went to sleep or not, but roughly 36 hours of talking about network automation, hopefully most of us who are still here, right, because all the salespeople have left at this point, that's why the room's a little bit emptier. The question really is, now what? All right, because hopefully, right, the idea that Scott and I had when we put this together was to provide a focus point for this community that's already existed, right? Many of us have been working on this for 10, 20, maybe 30 years, trying to move network operations forward. Automation and orchestration and observability seem to be the current focus words around the things we're doing to make this all easier and make networks more reliable, make the user experience better. But okay, so we had AutoCon 0. Now what, right? When you go home, back to your work, back to your jobs, back to whatever you do, I hope that some of this is gonna percolate over. And so I want to talk a little bit about that. I've taken some notes throughout all the presentations over the last day and a half. And just to make it fun, I want to start with a knife fight. So Kirk talked about Yang and NetConf for all. And I'd love the first 3 people who can make it to a mic to tell me why we should all move to Yang and NetConf, or why we should not. Chris, one
So I can give you answers to both, because I think both are valid to a degree. But why you should, turns out APIs are good, and not having to screen scrape and deal with human interfaces for network devices is really nice. That being said, I think the big problems with NetConf Yang are the lack of standard models to a degree. I think that it's kind of the same problem you had with SNMP and MIBs, right? It's just SNMP++, and all the MIBs are now Yang, which is admittedly better, but it's still different from every vendor. Every vendor wants their special sauce. Some vendors don't even link to that stuff or check that it's valid. A lot of northbound interfaces on devices just are not functional. They just don't work. Sienna, Infinera looking at you. So those are kind of some of the reasons to not to, but I am a believer that long term it is the right way to go. And I would even go as far to say, like, I wish I had NetConf and Yang on more things. Like, I use it every day, and now when I go to configure, like a Linux server, it feels kind of backwards to mess with config files. I would love to have a NetConf or an RPC-based interface to configure those things, which is kind of a hot take, but once you use it and you get used to it, and you're comfortable with it, it really is powerful. So I think there's answers to both. Like, you should use it if you can, but also I understand why you don't.
Drew Elliott from Nokia, so I'm a little bit biased, but I truly believe that having a consistent model-driven management driven by Yang allows you to have very standardized interfaces that, the biggest and most important part about it is the consistency that you get. And, all the things that Chris mentioned about the reasons that Yang is bad, those should be fixed by the vendor, and you should have the system actually be relying on Yang, like SR Linux, for example. Anyway, it's just consistency. And it makes being able to tie, one of the questions that someone asked earlier a couple different times was about why would a vendor, or why don't vendors all just make this magical API? And it is differentiation, but when you make your system available from a network programmability aspect using a consistent model-driven management interface, then it makes it very easy to incorporate into whatever process flow you're trying to use. So that's why I believe Yang is the way. And by the way, NetConf and Yang don't have to be necessarily always in the same word. They're 2 different things, okay?
Fair, it's a sentence, not a word. Very good point. Chris, and then we'll come to a Wim, I think I see over there.
Okay. Hey, Chris Woodfield. Don't forget, the CLI is in fact an API. It's just not a very good one, okay? But as the last person said, consistency is key. If you're developing a network operating system in the year 2023 and you are not basing all of your management objects and whatever API you're serving without Yang at its base, I'm not going to buy it. I mean, quite simply, unless I'm told to. But that means your CLI commands, your netcomp, your GNMI, whatever if you're Arista, your REST API, common base at the bottom, and whatever API you're using to access information is really just becomes an implementation detail at that point.
I like it. Yep.
Yeah, Wim Hendricks from Nokia. So I think if we talk about programmability, having a programmatic interface and an API is essential, right? Now, I would add to what the other people said. I'm a big believer in code generation, right? When we are talking about automation, I think we should build a system on which a lot of these plugins get auto-genned and all of that stuff, right? So it's beyond just, okay, can we interact with it because it's built for a machine, right? At the end of the day. And so the good thing is also, okay, we build it for a machine, but we actually also have a human aspect of it, because actually we basically generate our CLI from the Yang at the end of the day. Now, I think the problem that we face, I mean, in Azure Linux, we started from scratch. So you have 100% coverage. We have the other operating system, which is Azure OS. It took us 7 years to get from where we started to, I think now we are, I could say 98% or something like that. Is it complete? I think it's almost complete, but it's hard, is what I'm trying to get to. And so the challenge that we have, and the second thing I wanted to add is like Yang is, I'm questioning, did we did the right thing going down that path, because we are a bit in a snowflake. So that's the challenge that we have in the networking that I see. I think Yang is a great tool. It has the most advanced features that we ever delivered, but we are a little bit in a snowflake with it. And that's, I think, the challenge that we have in networking is that, that we are based upon it. Now, can we turn back the time? I doubt it, right? So that's the challenge with it. So if we make it such that it doesn't matter, I think that's how we have to think about it, in my view. So, but having 100% coverage to achieve our automation journey is going to be important, because otherwise we have to have a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and it becomes way and way more complicated to do the journey. But we have to deal with the state that not everything is there for some time. So that's my take.
Thanks. Urs, we'll do that and then we'll move to the next question.
Thanks. I have a hate-love relationship with Yang. So as more I do with Yang, the more I hate it. It's, how can I say, it's really a complex language. It has so many features, so many advanced features. So if I would find a genie, I would probably wish that we have tomorrow just open the API from all windows. So Yang, I think if I remember, it was the first version is 2008 or something, around this. And there, yeah, I think also the ecosystem we have in Golang, definitely there is much better tooling around, I would say. In Python, we have still a lot legacy code we have to use. So, yeah, I have this hate-love relationship. But I definitely say we need to have programmatical schemas, we need validation, all this stuff. So CLI we will always have for troubleshooting, for convenience maybe, but to configure we should definitely try to have something with schemas.
Well, I missed how you teed this up because I was out of the room for a second. So
We're asking the audience questions based on what they learned in the last 36 hours and or possibly experienced before this. I don't know if anyone here has any experience before this conference, but they may have.
They may have. I think there might be a little bit. So I'm checking for, I don't see any more queue at the, what do you think is next? This is really what this is about. We're trying to assimilate everything that we've brought together for this event, and that puts way too much on Chris and myself. I don't mean to make us prime movers, right? I think we provided a place for people to come together virtually, and we think there are things that we can do to help fan that flame, pour kerosene on it. I'm really interested in what you think would be useful from a body like NAF.
Actually, I have some thoughts on that side before I came here.
And don't be afraid to eat the mic. I really want to be able to hear you.
Yeah, thank you. Victor, I have been in this domain. Luckily, I'm a software engineer in the network world for more than 20 years. So I guess with the gentleman's comments, right? 5 years training a software engineer, 5 years for a network engineer. One point I want to make here is reduce the barrier for others to learn. No matter you're a network engineer or software engineer, reduce the barrier when you share some knowledge. The successful example is in the machine learning world, where there's a website, everyone can look at it, called Paper with Code. Every publication people write up with all the fancy machine learning algorithms, they put their open source, not only the code, but also the data set, into a single place. So the other people can easily reproduce their work by running their script, loading their data set. That make that machine learning community booming in the past 5+ years. We have excellent talks here with the open source, published, with the tutorial people can follow. As long as every one of us sharing your knowledge, your experiences, reducing that barrier for other side of the people to learn, I guess this forum is making a great success.
So one thing that I caught, I forget in which session, on reducing barriers is stop treating your APIs like IP. I mean intellectual property, not internet protocol addresses. Did that strike anybody else? Is that an issue that people run? Okay. So I think that's something for us to flag and say, okay, what can we do to put more emphasis on that? And that's just one small piece of reducing barriers, for sure. Garrett, we recognize you.
Okay. Something that I've learned from, I had a lot of people come up to me after my presentation and just say, I'm at your square one type of thing. There's a huge range of where people are at right now. So there are topics on AI and machine learning, and I had people come up to me and say, hey, my IPAM is a spreadsheet. There's a huge gap, I think, between where everybody is. So I think something that this body of people could do to help bridge that gap is make a network automation Bible or something. When we were going through the transformation of our network where, we knew what I mentioned it in my presentation, we were defining systems without identifying vendors at one point, right? And then when we went to go solve those problems, man, I spent so much time just Googling, how do I do this? I had no reference for how to get any of this stuff from paper to production. And so for everybody in here to have to do that by themselves over and over and over, we shouldn't have to. When these people are coming up to me and saying, hey man, I have a spreadsheet, how do I get started? Somebody shouldn't have to come to a conference and ask me that. They should pull up the NAF Bible or whatever it is and say, okay, step one, throw Prometheus out there. You've got metrics gathering. Whatever we agree that should be, it doesn't have to be Prometheus, just an example. But whatever that may be, it should be easy enough for everybody in here to just pull up this Bible and say, okay, if I want to get started, let me find where I'm at compared to these steps. Okay, I'm going to jump in right here, and this is where I'm at.
So one thing I want to point out on your presentation in particular, I think this is something we talked about when I was on the Imposter Syndrome Network, that reducing barriers for people to ask questions. Don't make people feel like idiots. Actually, and it's come up a couple different times, right? This is part of culture change. And apologies to anybody who actually listened to one particular podcast episode, but I remember as a TAC engineer being totally afraid to ask what might be a dumb question because I knew a certain number of escalation engineers were going to be all RTFM on me, and I don't mean fine manual. So, I think that's a responsibility that we can all take here and amplify things like that. Do I see Barry next? Oh, okay, very good.
Hi, Jeff McAdams, Vulture Cloud. I made a comment yesterday in one of the chat channels about how many of the talks were refreshingly, in my mind, about definition of terms. And I think there's a lot of need for defining. I think Urs just made a comment on where to go on that in the channel as well. And I think that's an important part of just being able to have definitional terms so that we can have conversations and everybody's speaking the same language. And that's and you can also look at that a little bit fractally. It's not only a human thing, but it's also, that's what a protocol is, right? Maybe at some point we start talking about what are the protocols that we use for defining network automation exchanges or something. I don't know, I'm talking out of thin air here, but yeah. But just as a definitional function that, we had a lot of debates here about what source of truth is, and but I think that's a useful conversation to have and very foundational.
So I promise not to have commentary on every question that's asked here. However, one thing that hit me like a ton of bricks yesterday was the taxonomy discussion. And for me, it started with Chris Cummings. Chris, are you still in here? It's your fault, man. I didn't agree with the hairs you split, no pun intended, between automation and orchestration. But as I thought about it, it's like, I can live with his definition. And probably what's more important is we understand what the terms mean and we're all using them in a very similar way. And I feel like that's something that we could definitely, again, not Chris and I writing the glossary, but working with the group to come to common definition of terms like that. What do you think?
100%. Same thing. It was an early takeaway, and it kept getting repeated through a number of talks. This idea that, within a single network engineering team, it is often difficult to talk to somebody. I think again, going back to culture, right? There's this thing of like, okay, well, a lot of network engineers, at least the ones that are my age or older, probably maybe a little bit younger still, there was no TikTok, there was no YouTube, there wasn't you got lucky enough to sit next to somebody who knew what they were doing, or you read RFCs and figured it out, right? And maybe called TAC and tried to keep them on the phone long enough to figure out what the heck you were doing. And because of that, there's a generation, at least, if not a very wide, I was gonna say fat generation, but that would be a very wide generation of us who learned in very specific ways how to do networking from people around us. And so there's if you came up at N-layer, you do networking one way. And if you came up in the Bell system, you know networking a different way. And so then now you try to build a team of people, that grew up across these different areas. And then, new kids who are learning Amazon terms don't even know what a network is because they call it a VPC. It's crazy. Having a common language, I think, would be huge within networking, within a single team, but also across disciplines would be pretty valuable. Yeah.
I think we're in violent agreement. Now, that is Barry, correct?
Yes.
Okay, you have it.
Sorry, it's too tall for me. I had a few thoughts on just what Garrett was saying, that cut out, and also you, Scott, and also Jeff. I think a common place to ask questions for people who don't know where to start, I think would be a good thing, maybe even just a channel on the Slack where they're not in the general or the main channel. And I was thinking of a read the docs repository where we could all contribute, and that could also include the definitions and whatever. It doesn't have to be read the docs, but just something where it can be a repository and we can fork it, we can contribute, whatever, something like that, yeah.
Again, I promise not to comment on every question. However, I'm trying. But so the concept of automatic generation of documentation, I think is huge. As entrepreneurs, we're trying to use our time in the best possible way, right? And we're trying to automate the heck out of everything, not just networks. Boy, if we could find a way to do that as a Slack integration or some other tool set, I think that would be valuable.
Hi, I'm also Garrett. Yeah, I know, right?
Eat the mic. Please eat the mic.
Along the same lines as what Garrett was saying, I think us as a group, we kind of have to be the change that we want to see. So write blog posts, share our experiences, evangelize it within your organizations, really kind of take people along the journey with you, and just host lunch and learns and things like that to help bring your coworkers along. I think that can go a long way in this whole journey for us.
Yeah, I really like the Automation Fridays.
Yes.
Garrett squared over here. It's good.
Yes,
Yeah.
100%.
I think back to stage left. Wim, you already asked a question.
No, I answered the question. No, I'm going to make a potential statement of stuff. I'm a big believer of practicing, right? Because I think if most of the networking people that I know is like you do something, you try it out, you see it, and you believe at some point, right? You become a believer. I have the feeling that if we talk about network automation, you almost have to write code to be able to practice it today. And I'm wondering whether we should do something, and actually working on something, to allow people to practice it without you having to write code, right? Because I believe that we will bring many more people along the journey in a step-by-step approach. Maybe they will eventually get to the full-blown coding, but at least that they can practice it. And let me give you an example of what I'm trying to say. For example, we talk about a declarative system, right? So interacting with a device in a declarative way, or basically doing orchestration. Like take just Terraform today and interacting with a physical box. Can we do it today? I don't think there is any tooling today that allows you to do that. You can do it in AWS, you can do it in things, but we don't have tools that basically consume netconf, GNMI, and things like that, where people can just say, I build a Terraform file, and I'm going to put a set of configuration snippets onto the device, and people can see what happens, right? And if that's the right place, so I have the feeling that we need to invest a bit, and this is more of a question to the other side of the people in the room, is that we would potentially benefit to bring those tooling along, such that people can experiment with it, perceive it as a CLI. For me, it's like a YAML file or a Terraform file. I'll perceive it as a CLI, but bring them along into the journey where they can experiment with automation, orchestration, without you having to, because today the only way you do that is you go to a vendor, you have to buy a big machine and experiment. That's the way we do it, but I have the feeling that we have to build a tooling system that is, it's probably open source, and that is lightweight, that you can exercise on a PC or on your laptop and bring people along the journey. And I'm a big believer of that personally, as a way to help the community and help in the journey to get us along this way.
So how much of a stretch is it to extend Container Lab to help with some of those things?
Okay, I was a bit provoking the discussion. So I'm personally working on some of the tooling that I'm just explaining. See, Container Lab is basically giving you a lab, right? When we talk about automation, we are talking about the configuration of the device and getting state out of it. And if we talk about orchestration, we talk about putting pieces together and make a bigger thing, right? So that's my definition of it. So then the question is, what systems do you use to accomplish something like that? I'm personally a big believer of using Kubernetes as a framework to do so, because you get a lot of tooling with it, right? And so I'm personally working on something to achieve that, so be able to interact with a device through a Kubernetes API and stuff like that. So we are not so far away from it, but the question is it useful and will it help us into the journey? But you get like when you use Kubernetes as a system, you basically get a declarative API, you get an intent-based behavior on how you interact with the system, and you can build bigger things. And you tap into a big ecosystem of things that are available to us, like GitOps tooling. There is a lot of things for free that we don't even have to do anything for, we just have to consume. And I'm of the opinion that those type of things could help us bring the community along the journey that we all have to go through some way or another, without you having to write code. Of course, I would welcome people to help contribute making this happen. But I'm personally a believer of doing so to help the community moving forward.
Well, I appreciate the hand raise, for sure. So, thank you. And we're taking notes. So, in the middle.
Thank you so much, İlker Alıcı from Nokia. I would like to make comments and share my idea about the first Yang, and then I'm just want to connect it to some point that ask your thoughts and everyone's thought. So first of all, we're talking about automation, and for me, the programmability is equal to pre-automation, because we have the statements and really strong statements to be able to have a successful automation. And the statements is actually tied to data, right? Structured data. And for me, I will say, as a network operators, our arsenal for perfect automation is the data. And I think Yang has been helping us for the last 10, 15 years. So I strongly believe in Yang is the good modeling language that help us. So the second thing, we need a really real-time statements, and then to be able to automate the things in a real time, to take an action to avoid the catastrophic results on the network. So for that reason, what I'm thinking, and I want to ask your thoughts, are we still want to invest on the SNMP instead of like getting the statement in 5 seconds, 15 minutes, 5 minutes, and within that time frame, the network behavior already is changing at the time that we see what is the result, or we would like to really invest on the data or real statement in a real time, which using the modern telemetry.
Do we want to ignite the SNMP debate again here? I mean, I have an opinion.
Just burn it down.
And if you burn it down, there's still somebody who's going to say, no, I needed that.
Definitely tongue-in-cheek.
That's fine.
Well, and that's what's weird about technology, right? Is I don't know if you guys subscribe to like the Kevin Kelly view of the technium, right? Which is the idea that technology is actually this new branch of life that's co-evolving with humanity. The interesting thing, though, is if you look at it that way, it works pretty well. Like if the science of it, like the way you look at the way technology kind of adapts and becomes more specific and more specific, it looks a lot like a form of life. The interesting thing, though, is that forms of life, once they go extinct, they stay extinct. Technology never dies. It just like pops back up, right? Like I was in a rental car place the other day, and they printed out my receipt on a dot matrix printer with the little like tabs on the side with the holes in it.
That was Avis.
It was Avis. I don't even know where they're getting these fucking printers. Like, how are you getting replacement parts for this? I mean, fine, but it's wild, right? So that's what's interesting about technology. So I mean, SNMP is not ever going to go away, I think, right? I mean, there's going to be some corner of the world somewhere. I bet you right now, if we tried hard enough, we could find somebody running ThickNet.
I'm sure.
Right?
Yeah, no,
there's a bank. There's
sure.
some bank vault somewhere with a mainframe and some vampire taps just going nuts.
And X.25 over the WAN, right?
Yeah. But we can also like move the needle towards the newer technologies and what we actually need.
So,
did you hear that? Punch cards.
Yeah, sure. No, they're good for bookmarks now. Books. They're paper with writing on them. Just 2 other quick comments on this. In my last corporate employer, we very much wanted to build clean and not support SNMP. And guess what? We had customers that basically forced us to do it. But the other positive example of this is in about 1997 at Bell Atlantic, we finally decided, let's turn off Apple Talk and see who calls. And we did it, and nobody called.
I'm a big fan of the turn it off and see who screams
so
method of network reliability. Yeah.
And that's going to be in each of your networks, right? So there will come a point where you can turn off SNMP, kind of, and see what happens. I don't think it's going to be a federal or global mandate. You're going to have to do it in your own networks.
I'll go. Drifting back towards the question, like the original, like how do we move forward, and like how do we get more people involved? And I was thinking about this too when somebody asked the question about how to get people involved in my open source projects. For me, when I'm trying to figure something out, when I hit that like Bible somebody created or that technical post, if it has like the specific answer I'm looking for, that's great. If I'm just kind of skimming through, I see it, I'm like, oh, no thank you. And it might have stuff in there that's great for me, but like the great thing about this week has just been the community. And so I think like driving those community conversations in a way that is communal, right? Like whether that's Slack, I know it's maybe not popular. I hate Slack, but like if it's on Discord, I have like a lot of projects like I really like and find interesting, and I've got Discord just like up on a window, and I'm like clicking through it during the day, and some of my best takeaways from this weekend, like the talks have all been great, but I'll be sitting at lunch with a table of people like I don't know, so I'm being quiet, and they're just talking about something else. I'm like, oh snap, like it's not even directly relatable to a problem I'm trying to solve, but like I'm snatching a pen, I'm writing something down, I'm taking notes, right? So like pushing people towards the conversations more. So if it's Slack, like having that on the front page of my thing, right? Saying, hey, join my Slack, or hey, or our Slack, join the Discord, so that people, even if they're not actively engaged, are getting involved in the conversation and probably will eventually become engaged.
So if I can rephrase that in the most self-serving way possible, everyone here should go tell 10 people about the Network Automation Forum and the Slack and the event and everything you learned this week.
First, I want to say thank you for putting on the event. I'm Trevor. I'm a principal architect at Presidio. And you came to this event asking what is slowing down automation adoption and networking. And to answer that question as somebody who straddles both sides, originally, a network engineer, worked a lot on like F5s and got close to devs and kind of migrated into that area. I got asked that question a lot during lunches and sitting down at tables, like where do I start? And my advice is to find those most soul-draining tasks you have to do as a network operator and engineer, that toil, and start eliminating it. Because as we talk today, there's other skill sets that you have to learn, right? And unless you're gonna dedicate a lot of your personal time like I do, because I'm a nerd that likes to do it, right? I'm not a gym bro that just wants to go work out for 4 hours, right? Unless you're gonna sacrifice that time, right? You need to free up some time, and network automation can help that. So starting with that toil is a good place. And as I work with a lot of my customers on cloud adoption, right? And their DevOps teams and some of the things we do over there, we spend a lot of time scrolling through READMEs on GitHub, right? Trying to find solutions to our answers that we don't really have to start from scratch. I think what would help a lot of network engineers is something similar, right? Where a lot of network problems, those toily problems, have been solved, and there's some guidance around that maybe you adopt a little bit to your specific organization's context and workflows and stuff of that nature. So as you work through those toilet tasks, don't be afraid to interact with the community either for help or publish it, right, in a README on a GitHub or in a blog.
Nice, thank you. And that's a good segue to the next question, but we'll take one more answer to this one before we move on to the next one.
Igor from Nokia. We heard about API not being IP. We heard about snowflakes. We heard about the problems in integrating different vendors. So I'll stop my preface here and just ask, is OpenConfig useful at all? Why? Why not? Should we invest more on it as a, a community?
I think that's a good question. I think anyone who hates OpenConfig should find Igor at the bar and he'll buy you a beer. That's what I heard.
I hope nobody has tomatoes in hand here.
Okay, let me ask one more question for everybody before as we're wrapping this up. Go for it.
Yeah, so our team in a whole country, in a country office, worked on OpenConfig. What turns out is we end up CLI-based automation. One of the reasons is you can't do 100%. Even you reach 90% with the struggle from the vendors, support, etc., you end up 10% on CLI. Then why bother you have two automation platform? That's some lesson we learned 4 years ago.
I agree, and I agree that's the case today, but my point is, should we as a community push this? Is it something worth doing, or should we just forget and consider that every vendor is going to have their own API and that's fine?
Continue. It's a great question. I definitely don't have an answer. I think what I've seen of OpenConfig already is there's this problem with standardization in that type of way, which is, as we saw with SNMP, right? You standardize the MIBs, and then everybody has enterprise MIBs. That's all their custom stuff. Because the problem with this kind of, and it goes back to the same idea of like this one API to rule them all. The issue there is either that API or config standard or data schema or whatever it is so massive and so detailed that like if the map becomes the terrain, it's no longer a map. Right? So you've got that issue on one side. And the other side is if you do standardize it and you do kind of compartmentalize that and narrow it down, well then where do I differentiate as a vendor? How do I actually create something new and something useful? Right? So it's the same thing with like if you look at the cloud space and the whole multi-cloud thing that's we've been talking about that for a while now. It's a very similar issue, which is okay, but if I want to provide a differentiated service and then you try to layer on this multi-cloud platform above me, you actually have to cut out my differentiated service in order to provide this standard interface, which there's pros and cons. Maybe that's a good thing because you've given me a standard interface, or maybe that's terrible because you're missing out on all the features that I developed in the last 3 years. I don't know that there's a good answer.
Yeah, there's a slider bar, right, where it's really good that IP addresses are standardized and IPv6. It's really good that BGP and OSPF and ISIS are standardized, and the behavior is very, very consistent across platforms regardless of different vendor implementations. SNMP, was supposed to be the one ring to rule them all. I like to do the visual here, But then we got enterprise MIPS, right? And we're having the same problem with Yang. I'm sorry for all my Yang friends. Drew, don't hate me if you're still out there. I know you can beat me up about it later. I spent a long time in vendor land, and vendors want to differentiate. And we want them to differentiate. So figuring out where the line is. Look, why do we have ASs in BGP? You can do whatever you want in your AS, and I can do whatever I want in my AS. But BGP works between the ASs, and we still have connectivity. So it's finding that balance of what interactions do we need to standardize versus what we leave for differentiation.
Well, that's interesting, right? The whole like, my network is my network, your network is network kind of thing is interesting because it rolls all the way back to, in some ways you could call like the beginnings of where we are now talking about, right? This network automation, the advancement of network operations. In some ways, right, this kind of started, or at least there was a big inflection point around 2012 when OpenFlow was announced, right? And the problem with OpenFlow is that, like, cool, we've got this new interface where we can do anything with a switch, as long as every switch you want to deal with already does OpenFlow. And guess what? None of them do yet. So it's a problem, right? And so that's the other side of it too, is there's this bootstrapping problem with new standards and things like that. All right, now we've opened a can of worms, I think. Where are we at?
Well, I can comment on the open config side. Alex Bortek from Keysight here. So one of the questions is it the same API you're looking for, or are you looking the same behavior that originates from having the same API? And like where we contribute to OpenConfig is actually making sure that behavior is, ambiguous across multiple vendors. So we are building test suites to make sure that this is the case. But this is not what the vendors actually need, right? They need differentiation. And people who are primarily contributing to OpenConfig today, they do that for their use cases, which, to be honest, are a very small subset of what the industry uses in the whole, especially if you go to the enterprise space. And because of that, OpenConfig cannot be the only way you would configure the devices. You have so many other people who don't want to adopt OpenConfig or don't think about it this way. So it's a really difficult proposition to migrate and use OpenConfig in general. I think it will still be a niche area for specific use cases.
So we're going to lock responses down to these last two individuals. And then Chris is going to ask our last question because we're empty and we're tired. In the middle.
Ravi Pina. In regards to OpenConfig, I feel, as all of us being collective operators, we want to reduce the friction to automation and orchestration. And I'm not entirely sure that OpenConfig is the path of least resistance, especially if we're looking to hire, software developers straight out of college, or even ourselves who don't know software development, naturally. So that, maybe one argument against OpenConfig, because it's just speed of adoption and, speed to velocity.
Yeah, so I'm going to interject more, sorry. I'm not going to comment on every comment. But there's this other piece of this, right, which is interesting, which is I think that there are, I've been thinking about this idea of like different levels of standardization, right? And what I mean is like, so one good example is something like P4, all right? So P4 got a lot of hype and a lot of interest. I think a lot of people were really excited about this idea of like having this programming language where you could make your ASICs do anything if they understood this programming language. And then people were like, I can't actually use this. Well, that's because you don't build hardware. Like if you're building switches and you're building switch OSs, P4 is actually super interesting. If you're building a network, it's probably meaningless, right? And I think that's something that's interesting. So OpenConfig, from my experience as if I'm building actual software tools, using that as my reference point and trying to build as close to it as possible is great. When I'm building a network, I tend to not care about it too much because my model doesn't fit.
I'll just, so to throw, if we talk about OpenFlow and P4 and what they did for us, interesting experiments, right? But talk about all the challenges that we've just been discussing here about, network engineers don't want to be programmers. OpenFlow is basically like assembly programming for a fib, and not a rib, a fib, and you have to understand a little bit about the chip architecture used in the switch and so forth. P4 gives you another layer of abstractions, but it's more like C, right? And it's still programming level type information. And I think those are probably the biggest barriers for OpenFlow and P4 never really taking off. So, but that's one guy's opinion. Chris.
Wait, okay, now I gotta change topics briefly to talk about P4. I still use it. I did a project this summer with P4. Unfortunately, it only really lives in the FPGA land now, but it is still out there and it's still useful. But anyway, back to the topic of OpenConfig. When I first learned Yang and I had known about OpenConfig and I first started getting my hands dirty with it, I really thought, oh, this is great. Wait, people aren't implementing OpenConfig and IETF Yang? Like, this is useless. And that was my immediate thought, right? Then, as I started to use it, I realized that, well, yeah, it would be really nice if we had OpenConfig or IETF Yang as standards that we could always rely on. And then, yeah, maybe I could use the vendor-specific Yang models for the special sauce that every vendor has to throw in so that they can sell you more boxes than new boxes, right? But you don't need that, and you still get the benefits of the standardized API and the standardized interface, regardless of how standardized the actual schema is. And so it's still incredibly valuable, even though the models aren't standard. And the approach we took was to build a mediation layer that allows us to define what is standard for us, translate that into the devices, and it's a lot easier to do that when you have a nice interface like netconf, Yang, GNMI Yang, whatever, instead of having to do CLI, right? So I think it's still really beneficial. So I think it's easy to really just want to throw away Yang because we don't have standard models, but it's still leaps and bounds better than anything else unstandard.
Don't throw away the netconf with the Yang bathwater?
Exactly. And I'm also selling Yang bathwater on my website if you want some.
All right, so last question before we close out. As many people can answer as well. I'm going to pose this in two ways. So if you are fairly new to your automation journey and you came here to learn, what are you going to do? What's the first thing you're going to do tomorrow morning when you fire up Enable or whatever it is, Thursday, Friday? Or if you're more seasoned on this path, what should the new folks, what's the first thing they should do, right? Coming out of this conference, what's the next step? Like, literally what now, but in your network, right? What are you going to do?
I definitely want to do a Sean Connery there. What are you prepared to do, right? From the Untouchables, right?
I guess I kind of wish I said this earlier when there was more people here, but if you happen to be a manager at this event, for your next refresh cycles or the next project you're going to implement, whether that's introducing Zero Trust or some new firewalls or new switches or new routers, bake an automation-first mindset into your project. So your project is not done until there's some sense of automation in there. Even if you're not fully automating whatever new project you're working on, at least think about it. Think about what vendor you're going to go with. And then if you're an IC and you can't make that decision, be the thorn in the side of your manager and just keep talking about it. Say, I know we did this project, but we should have thought about automation, and just keep pushing that. And that's my opinion on how to get started there.
I saw Garrett before the other two queued up. So.
Yeah, mine will be real quick. This is something that I tell my team. We have people on our team that had never done any programming before. This might be hard for some of you to hear, but my advice to the new people programming is just shut up and start coding.
Just do it.
Yeah, I'm going to iterate on that same point. There is a lot of really, really cool, really big projects that we're showing off the last couple of days. However, they all start as one line of code. Prototype, prototype, prototype, prototype. If you have an idea, prototype it first. It's much easier to share an idea with somebody when it's real. We can talk all day about like, oh, I'm gonna have, single source of truth and that's gonna go into this, and you can come up with proposals and everything else, but real code can get more people behind you and behind your idea if you can show the value of it, and it doesn't have to be good code. So don't worry about good code, make it work first, and prototype, prototype, prototype.
I definitely agree. I would say get your hands dirty and don't be afraid to share your code. So I see code of myself from 10 years, 15 years ago. My first thought is, oh my God, who wrote this shit?
I love the advice. The thing I'm going to do when I go home is I'm just going to take another shot at setting up a CI/CD. So I've bounced off of it before because running Ansible basically requires a machine. And running a VM, a long-lived VM, just to have a machine that executed my Git commits as like an action just seemed like overkill, but I'm going to make it happen because I feel like that was a challenge that was made at this conference.
Someone said it referring to something else, but don't try to boil the ocean on the first shot. And then kind of along the lines of that, iterate as much as possible up front, as quickly as possible, because later on, as soon as you get like a much more mature infrastructure and framework, it's going to be a pain in the ass to try to go and fix things potentially. So, making mistakes early is really kind of the gist.
So I'm not going to answer the question, but do a suggestion. Given that you have all the automation brains here, I think maybe leave your Slack channel open forever. So keep as folks work on it, share ideas and whatnot. Or maybe some folks don't like Slack, do a Discord channel with the same set of folks and continue communication over there. So as we all try different things and iterate, we can share and learn.
I like it a lot. I'll add one thing. I think, hearkening back to Kat's talk about troubleshooting using APIs, I would roll that back to just the troubleshooting part. If you're really brand new and there's no automation in your network, or it's very underground, where they call it like shadow automation, I guess you would call it maybe, a really, really, really cool place to start is with read-only automation, right? Write scripts that go out and collect information and tell you things, right? You want to trace down a VLAN across 500 switches, write a script for that, right? You need to find out if you forgot to add MPLS onto an interface somewhere, write a script for that. I think that's a really good place to kind of get your feet wet and just do that prototyping, because unless you really, really, really get outside the bounds, it's hard to crash a switch with a show command. You can do it. So, still test your code somewhere, right? But it's a lot harder than if you're actually like pushing configs and things like that.
We don't test on animals, we test in production, right?
Who said that earlier? That
that was on somebody's slide.
Everyone has a dev environment. Right?
Yes.
It's also the production environment.
That's right. Well, and that's what Blender.
I'm screwing the quote up, but whoever said it was genius. Yeah.
Vendors get blamed for, hey, you're testing in my production network, right? So.
Well, thank you very much for this conference. It's been amazing. We've been in a long journey with automation. One of the key points I'm taking from the panelists or from talking to my peers here is to treat automation more of a system solution. I think that's going to allow us to move into the next step. That may scare off some of our brand new peers who don't know how to code, but we still have that open mentality where we can help them still write scripts and get familiar with it. But for those that be in this long journey, we can start looking as a full solution as part of the larger project where we can also integrate test framework. I think that's going to allow us into the next step. Thank you.
That's a good point. And one more comment on that. This idea of, which is not just an idea, it's a real thing, right? And myself included, this idea of like network engineers being afraid of code and being afraid of becoming software developers. I think we need to really, when you have that gut reaction, that gut feeling, like take a hard look in the mirror, because Junos, iOS, SROS, like these are programming languages. They're very constricted and very specific, and you may have tab complete on the CLI, but you've been programming your entire career. So don't be afraid of Python, where all the libraries were already written for you.
Well, and that point in the what can we do better, or how can we do better discussion, do we teach networkers programming or programmers networking? Why are we surprised that there's a variety of responses to that, right? One size does not fit all. And I love the movie Moneyball, right? Why do we like him? Because he gets on base. You want the right set of skills on the team, and it doesn't necessarily matter where those skills reside, as long as you have the right skills on the team.
Yeah, I think one thing that's missed a lot in the beginning is knowing what you have in your fleet. What do you have out there? What assets are there? The metadata about it, what platforms, and putting that somewhere that you can reference as a target list. That's something that I wish I had known when I first started. It's so important.
That's
and
your
it's
first
not
project,
sexy.
right? Just pull the inventory and put it somewhere where everybody can see it. Yeah.
Yep.
That is a very common approach for vendor tools. Find that really simple use case that will grab all the inventory. Many, many different vendor tools have started out by being able to inventory.
I just had a quick comment. Sometimes it's hard to get like support from your management level. One trick that I've learned recently, and we're fairly mature just as an organization as far as network automation goes, but like say we wanted to go back and refactor like one of our original repositories, because no one's touched it in 2 years and things could be done in a better way. But where do you find the time to do it, right? So the trick was to like make that a requirement for like some really important project. like someone said, okay, we must do 802.1x or whatever it is. And they say, well, in order to do that, we actually have to like refactor all our code or something like that. So I know one of the hard things when you're just getting started is getting the support. Because they're like, oh, well, you could have done that over, the evening last night. Why didn't you do that? Yeah, just, put a stake in the ground and say, no, we need to
I can
do it
get
a
the
better way.
groceries, dear, but I need a new car.
Yes, exactly. And it has to be self-driving.
Did you happen to sit in on the business case for automation BOF?
No, I didn't. I sat in the brownfield one.
Okay.
Because that was,
so
spoke to me, yeah.
That's in that neighborhood, right? And there's one level of just being able to justify, this is why we want to automate and spend time and resources on it. There's another level of, we'd like to rewrite all this. And that's a cultural issue, right? In software development world, we understand why we refactor. Network engineering, especially network operations management, not so much.
I don't even know that word.
Right. Well, we do.
Yeah, I was just thinking I should define that. Sorry. Right. Yeah, it means rewrite all your code for a great reason.
I see the queue draining. There's no need for tail dropping.
No, we're good.
Uh-oh. Is it? All right, this is it. Last answer.
Don't over-engineer.
Say that again?
Don't over-engineer.
We'll leave it at that. Thank you so much, everybody. This has been amazing. Really appreciate everyone being here.
I have one.